Good morning and welcome to another episode of Children's Church. We've been talking about what the Bible tells us about kids, stories about children. And actually this week's story is kind of like a bonus because it has two children in it, a boy and a girl. Now, to get to this story, we have to go way back in the Old Testament, back before there was a country called Israel, back before, when it was just a group of people known as Israelites or Hebrews. This is when they were living in Egypt. Now, after Joseph had been a ruler in Egypt, the people who were from his family, who became known as the Hebrews or the Israelites because of Joseph's father, his name being Israel, they were thought of with very high regard. People remembered how Joseph had saved the lives of the Egyptians during the famine. But, times change. And about 400 years had passed since then, and a new pharaoh arose in Egypt who couldn't remember his history because, frankly, his country had kind of conquered Egypt and he was now in charge, and he didn't like the Hebrews or the Israelite people. As a matter of fact, there were so many of them, he was terrified that they could possibly take over and kick him out. And so the first thing he did is he enslaved them. He forced them to do his work. And they were making pyramids and tombs and fancy projects and building cities. But that didn't stop them. They kept having more babies. Oh, so the Pharaoh said, this has to stop. We can't have so many babies. So he told the women who helped the Hebrew Israelite mamas when they were having their babies, he said, if it's a boy, kill it. If it's a girl, it can live. Well, they weren't going to do that. That wasn't their job to kill babies. So they told the Pharaoh, we just couldn't help it. The baby boys already popped out by the time we got there. We couldn't stop anything. Well, the Pharaoh got so mad, he ordered all the Israelite women that if they have a baby boy, they had to throw it in the Nile River and feed it to the crocodiles. Well, that's horrible. And one mama had a baby boy. Now, she had other children already. She had another boy and a girl. This little baby boy was born, and he was so beautiful. And the mama knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to throw that baby boy in the Nile River and feed him to the crocodiles. But she didn't want to do that. So she hid him at home as long as she could. Months had passed. And then she realized she better do something because the baby was getting too big and it was taking her away from her duties. And so she was going to be noticed and she would be found out. Someone would tell on her. So she had to figure something to do with the baby. Then she got an idea. Pharaoh said to throw the baby in the Nile River. So she sort of did it. There's a little bit of interpretation there. See, she took a basket and she coated it with tar and pitch on the outside so it was like a little waterproof boat, and she made a little lid for it. And she put the baby in the basket and she set it along the banks of the Nile River, in with all the rushes and the weeds so it would be hidden. And then she had her daughter, Miriam, a little girl, stay there and pretend she was playing by the river to watch over the basket and make sure nothing happened to it while mom was off at work. Well, this worked for a while, except for one day, Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile River to go swimming and bathing with her friends, and one of them saw the basket, because I bet the baby was probably crying. And she went over and she opened the basket and saw the baby, and she went, "Oh no, a baby!" And her friend said, yeah, it's one of the Hebrew children. They were supposed to throw it in the Nile River. I guess you could say they did. And Pharaoh's daughter looked at the little baby, and just like the little baby's mom, Pharaoh's daughter thought it was a beautiful little boy. And she wanted to raise that boy as her own. Now, Miriam was watching all this from her hiding spot, and she pops out thinking very quick. And she said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Hey, do you want me to find one of the Hebrew mamas who can wet nurse that baby, give it the mama's milk until it's old enough to eat food, and then you can raise it?" And Pharaoh's daughter said, "That's a great idea. Go find one right now." So what did Miriam do? Well, she ran to her mom, and she grabbed her and brought her to Pharaoh's daughter real quick and said, "Here is someone who could nurse the baby for you." And Pharaoh's daughter didn't ask any questions. She looked right at the baby's actual mother without knowing it and said, "Here, I want you to take this baby boy and I want you to raise him until he's old enough to eat food, and then bring him to me and I will raise him. And I will name him Moses, because I drew him out of the water." See, the name Moses means drawn out. Now, you probably know the rest of this story. That little baby boy was nursed by his mama, Miriam's mama, until he was old enough to go and live in the palace. And instead of being eaten by the crocodiles and the fishes of the Nile River, he was raised in the palace of the Pharaoh who had ordered his death. As a matter of fact, he was raised just like Pharaoh's grandson, a prince in Egypt. And that prince grew up and later became one of the greatest leaders that the Israelites have ever known, who led them out of Egypt, out into freedom in the Promised Land. And that's the end of this week's story. Well, we have our questions to ask, but first I want you to go back and listen to our story one more time. I'll wait for you. Go on. Okay, our questions for this week. Question number 1. What did you like about this story? What pleased you? Question number 2. What did you not like about this story? What displeased you? Question number 3. What does this story tell us about people? What people are like? Question number 4. What does this story tell us about God? What God is like? Question number 5 asks, what should I do differently because of this story? Now remember, you need to answer this one. I should something. And question number 6 says, who should I tell this story to? I look forward to seeing your answers. Remember to write them down in the comments down below. Look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of Children's Church.